that works? You guys heard of it before? Yeah. So kind of the same situation, except using unattended digital modes. It's not necessarily scanning the CW side, the subband, looking for guys who are active. This really does act more like a beacon network if you were to tune to any of the beacon CW stations, except pretty much anyone can get involved. There's no coordination that's required or anything like that. And Whisper is active on pretty much every HF band too. So Whisper stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. We just essentially think of it as a beacon. It's pronounced Whisper, written by Joe Taylor, which you guys already know, K1JT, who is well known within the amateur hobby for a number of different things involving Earth, Moon, Earth, HF, meteor scatter, which JTMSK and FSK 441 are really meteor scatter products of his. JT65 and 9 were originally developed for Earth, Moon, Earth on 2 meters and up, but obviously they're widely adapted now and used heavily on HF. The main objective here is to send and receive QRP and QRPP signals to test propagation openings, and really primarily on the HF bands. QRPP is kind of a term that's maybe not all that well known, but that's anything under a watt. And as we speak right now, I'm transmitting on 30 meters Whisper with about half a watt, 500 milliwatts. It's extensively used on the new 630 meter band, which is 472 kilohertz. It sits below the AM broadcast band, really because of its low bandwidth specifications. There's very, very limited bandwidth in the 630 meter band, and a lot of the guys that have experimental licenses are using Whisper, which is kind of neat, especially in the wintertime. I'll leave this on, down on 472 kilohertz overnight, and it's pretty neat to see what propagation is like on a band that's that low. These beacon signals contain a certain amount of data. It contains the station's call sign, their grid locator, which is typically just the 4-grid locator, and transmitter power in dBm. So it doesn't state 1 watt or 5 watts. It states 27 dBm, 37 dBm. There are plenty of online calculators for you to figure out, okay, well, if I'm going to do 5 watts, what's that equal in dBm? And then you can make that selection in the software. The most common Whisper mode by far is Whisper 2, which is used on all the HF bands. Whisper 2, all that means is it's a 2-minute transmission. So the other option is Whisper 15, which is used on some of the very low bands like 2200 meters or 630 meters. Broadcasts a minute and 50-second transmissions in a 2-minute window. So it starts on the even and ends on the odd minute at 50 seconds, and then there's 10 minutes of silence. Who's eating something? I hear that. Just like the JT modes, JT65 and 9, or the meteor scatter modes, actually any of Joe Taylor modes are time dependent. So you absolutely need an accurate computer clock that's synced to a reliable network time protocol server. Easy to do. There are a few programs out there. Meinberg NTP is a little bit more complicated to set up than Dimension 4. Dimension 4 is just like installing any program, and it'll sync your computer clock to a network time server. I like to use National Institute of Standards and Times time servers. There are a whole bunch of them. Normally, I'll sync to Fort Collins. In a pinch, what you can do when you don't have internet access is try and sync it manually by setting the time manually in Windows settings while listening to WWV, which is broadcast in Fort Collins. It's the National Institutes of Standards and Time. What's the word I'm looking for here? Time signal. on 2.5, 5, 10, and 20 megahertz. That's kind of a last resort, but your computer's clock will probably stay reasonably accurate within a half to a quarter second or so over 4 or 5 hours before any potential drift outside of that, and then you'd have to resync. But if you set it up to an NTP, you'll be fine. If you're really crazy, there are guys out there who will use those little GPS hockey pucks and create their own NTP servers using like a Raspberry Pi. But they don't rely on a... oh, here's Dave Hartman. Let's add him into the group here. Hey, Dave. Well, you should be in. Can you see the screen okay? All right, perfect. So we just kind of got started here talking about Whisper and a little bit about the mode itself. And we were talking about how an accurate time source is pretty essential as these transmissions are time-based. And we'll just kind of continue on where we left off here. Whisper functions like many other digital modes. You obviously need a sound card interface to your rig and computer. You transmit an upper sideband. Some of the more common ones out there are Signal Link, Rig Blaster. You can make homebrew options. Most of newer radios have a pin out on the back that you can attach, typically called like an ACC. One of the pins will be ACC, and you can transfer audio that way with a few audio transformers, 600 ohm transformers. But most people just choose to do a commercial option, and really the main two out there are Signal Link or Rig Blaster. You can also use a micro keyer. Many newer rigs incorporate an internal sound card that interfaces to your PC using a single USB connection out of the back of the radio. My IC7100 will do that, so I don't need to have a separate box like a Signal Link. It'll just interface audio for me through a USB cable. But you do obviously need a way to get audio from your rig to your PC, and then of course when you're transmitting, that audio is generated in your PC and translated to the rig for broadcast. You don't need, I shouldn't have put you also need, you don't need a CAT connection. CAT connection's nice because, the software that can then control your rig, and, if you want to switch bands, you just make a change in your software, it'll switch automatically for you. The real convenience of having a CAT connection is having the software key your radio for you. Some radios out there will let you key digital signals using Vox. So that's another option if you don't have a CAT connection. A lot of these options, like we were talking about before, like the Signal Link, will also include a way for your rig to be keyed via CAT through your computer. There are people out there that build beacons using just a Raspberry Pi, and I think they use like a soft rock or something like that. Plenty of solutions out there if you're interested in that kind of stuff. Guys will just build these little tiny all-in-one packages that'll broadcast a half a watt or quarter watt or something like that, and just leave it dedicated to Whisper. So if you're really into it, that's something that you might consider doing. Its decoding capabilities are really they're remarkable. For me, it's routine to decode signals with a signal-to-noise ratio down to 28 decibels below the noise floor in a pretty wide bandwidth, in about 2.5 kilohertz bandwidth. I've seen decode signals to 30 dB below the noise level. And frequently, you won't even see anything on your waterfall. It just magically appears there. It's just so faint that it's pretty resilient in being able to make decodes on very, very, very weak signals. Because of its selectivity and sensitivity at wide bandwidths, you don't need narrow filters in your rig or anything like that. You could just use your normal 2.4, 2.7, or 3 kilohertz filter for sideband transmissions, and you won't see a major difference at all. You'd see this type of stuff in CW where guys have really narrow filters, 200 hertz, 50 hertz, in an attempt to raise the signal-to-noise ratio with strong adjacent signals. But this is pretty resilient to that. The boring technical details I'll lead out, but two noteworthy specifications for you to kind of wrap your mind around how slow this mode is is it transfers data at 1.46 baud. It's 50 bits per message, and you can kind of see how it breaks down: 28 bits for the call sign, 15 for the locator or a grid square, and 7 for your power level. And that takes 1 minute and 50 seconds to transfer that information. So it's by no means a fast mode, but that's not really the purpose of it. The most popular band by far is 30 meters for Whisper activity. That's where a lot of guys who build their own dedicated beacons for Whisper will leave it. 30 meters always seems to be high in activity, and it's one of my favorite bands because it just always, it's that sweet spot between 40 meters and 20 meters, where 20 closes up at night, 40 kind of closes up during the day, except for regional stuff. 30 meters kind of just seems to always be open to some part of the world, 24/7, and it's always, if you take a look at the maximum usable frequency or MUF on any of the websites out there that generate that kind of data. It's not too often that you see it dip very much below 10 megahertz, which is a nice thing about 30 meters. It is used on all the other HF bands, especially 160, 40, 20, 10, and 6 meters. It's really useful on the low bands, like we were saying before, like 630 meters or 160, where probing for path openings is I don't know, more likely to be used because, 20, if it's nighttime, 40 meters is going to be open, 80 meters is going to be open. If it's daytime, 20 meters is going to be open. So it's frequently used as a tool to figure out what paths might be open throughout the world on some of the more difficult to work DX type of bands like 160. My observed rule of thumb, this is not based on calculations or theoretical calculations or anything like that, but if you're being heard at 1 watt on Whisper, you'll likely be heard at 100 watts on sideband or about 15 to 20 watts CW at that location, because it's a very efficient mode. 1 watt goes a long way on Whisper. And of course, you need more power for sideband to basically get the same transmission through. So that's kind of my rule of thumb. And these are, on just, your average ham antenna. 1 watt into stacked 5-element Yagis for 20 meters is going to go a heck of a lot farther than 1 watt into a dipole, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb to go by. What are its uses? Why is it widely used, and why do people contribute? Yes. Yeah, they're dedicated frequencies for each band. And the software will tell you exactly where you need to either turn your VFO, or if your rig has a CAT interface to the software, when you change bands, it'll put it exactly where you need it in the band's passband to transmit on Whisper. And that'll become apparent to you when I show you the software here in a few minutes. But there are specific frequencies. Yep. No problem. So what are the uses? Contributing to a massive database here of useful propagation data analysis, and that's WhisperNet.org, which I'll show you guys that website here in the next few minutes. Not the greatest implementation of data analysis that I've ever seen, but the data exists there. It's archived, and hopefully we'll be able to find more effective uses for it in the future. But as it stands right now, it is a great tool to have. I'll kind of tell you a little bit more about my thoughts on that when we get over to whispernet.org to take a look at it. Antenna pattern analysis. I write within understanding the limits because, are there going to be way more Whisper. No problem. There are going to be way more Whisper guys out there, both listening and transmitting in places like the Americas, in Europe, in Australia and New Zealand, than say there are going to be in Myanmar or down in South America. Um, yeah, it's just it's just kind of a fact, and that probably relates back to the fact that there are just way more amateurs in Europe and the Americas than there are in other parts of the country. The JAs, Japanese, you'll see them using Whisper way more than you're going to see people in China. So, kind of taking antenna pattern analysis with a grain of salt, knowing that there aren't receivers that are listening for your signal in a 360-degree view of your home. You can still begin to see how well you get out to certain areas where there might be nulls, stuff like that. Um, and of course, determining regular band openings to different parts of the world from your house and your antennas. Vocap's great. You can begin to do your own analysis of propagation based on Vocap's algorithms and software implementation, and figure out what likely is the best time of day for me to be able to hear this part of the world. But this gives you a firsthand view from your house using your equipment with your antennas where you're getting out to. If you're into that kind of stuff, playing around with QRP signals and stuff all the way down into the milliwatt range, it's kind of neat to see how far stuff will go on just a few watts. You can download Whisper as part of the WSJT-X software package, which is available on Joe Taylor's website. And there's some references there that I kind of pulled some data from Wikipedia, from Joe's website, and from WhisperNet. There are a couple neat programs out there. Whisper Watch for iOS is one of them. I can't remember if it's a pay-for app or if it's free. If I paid for it, it was like $1 or something like that. But I'll set Whisper up at work, or I'll set Whisper up before I leave, and when I'm at work, I can check in and see where I'm being heard. It's just kind of a brief overview of how it works. It gives you an idea of where you're being heard, where you're hearing, and it gives you all the information here on the left-hand side, the frequency that you're transmitting at. One neat thing is how many miles per watt you're being received at, or you're hearing another station at, the signal strength you're hearing at, the distance between locations. Just another way for you to be able to take a look and figure out where you're being heard, and how your antennas are working, and what propagation's like worldwide at that moment. And I'll show you WhisperNet. WhisperNet.org is basically where all of this data is compiled. When you send a signal out and another station receives it, as long as they have an internet connection and they enable you to upload spots in the software, which I'll show you how to do, when they receive your signal, all that information gets translated back to WhisperNet. So when I'm receiving stations here, when I'm not transmitting and I'm receiving stations, all of that information will get uploaded to WhisperNet, and then it gives you the ability to see kind of where you're being heard. Did I? Okay. I'm going to change this here. So there are parameters at the bottom. You could choose any specific band, or you can all the bands that you're being decoded or heard on. I put in my call sign because I want to know specific. If I didn't have my call sign, it would show me every station that's transmitting and receiving, which to me isn't all that useful. You can put your Latin long in, which just centers you where you are, but you can see that I can move the map around anywhere by just kind of clicking and dragging. And the time period, how long, you want to see spots that you've either been heard or you're hearing. And I'm going to go back to an hour here because you can kind of get an idea. I started Whisper around 7 o'clock. And when I first got home here on 30 meters, I'm running half a watt, about 500 milliwatts. And I'm also going into an 80-meter loop that's fed with coax. So there's a reasonably big mismatch that my tuner's taking care of, around 7 to 1. So there's some pretty significant loss then in the feed line. If I had to guess, I'm probably at about a quarter watt or so of RF that I'm broadcasting, ERP essentially. And you can see that even with such a small amount of power, I mean, we're talking about 250 milliwatts maybe. I was decoded in Australia. I was decoded in Iceland, all across Europe, and then all across the U.S. And like I said, if he's hearing me on a quarter watt, ain't no way he's not going to hear me on CW at 100 watts into my antenna at this point. You can take a look at an entire day's worth of stuff here, but I've only been running it for an hour, so it doesn't really matter. But you could see. You could change it to 24 hours, and then if I was running it for a significant period of time, it would show me everywhere I'm being heard, and you can begin to get a better idea of what parts of the world are open to you at different points of the day and stuff like that. This is pretty routine, by the way. Whisper at a half a watt on 30 meters, you're going to get decoded in Australia literally every day, which is kind of neat. People think the bands are dead, or they tune it on, they don't see any signals or anything like that. And meanwhile, you can literally work the world on just a small amount of power. I shouldn't say work the world, because keep in mind that these aren't QSOs that I'm making. I can't put this into my logbook and have LOTW approve it. You're a beacon. If you want to be making QSOs that would count towards awards or something like that, JT65 and JT9 is what you would want to be looking at, because those are actual QSOs that you're making and exchanging your call sign with other people around the world. And again, same type of situation. You can be doing that and working the world on a fraction of a watt. So that is pretty much the presentation portion of it, and gives you guys an idea of how to access the data that you generate when you do something like this. So we'll kind of go over here how Whisper works. And something happened to my audio, or for some reason it stopped pulling audio from my rig. Sorry, guys, give me 1 second here. Yeah, that was strange. Okay. Well, I'm back receiving Whisper. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with WSJT-X. It's one of the flavors out there that you can download to do things like JT65 and JT9. But Joe Taylor's version of that software that will do JT65 and 9 also includes Whisper. So setup, you'd go into your settings, you'd set your call and your grid square, and this applies for any of the different modes that are in there. Set up your radio accordingly. This is WSJT-X, so the software, the settings are universal no matter what mode you're going to use, either JT65, JT9, Whisper, FSK 441, any of them. This is like a one-stop shop here. Once you get your rig set up with this piece of software, you'll be able to transition back and forth between whatever mode you want to. You set up your audio in and out, and there are other settings here. I'm not going to get into the specifics of all the different options that are in here. Relatively pretty straightforward. I always enable PSK reporter spotting, and once you get your rig talking to your computer, you're pretty much set to go. Under modes is probably what you were talking about, and this lets me select between any of the modes here. JT9, JT65, those are the ones that we use on HF. These guys down here, ISCAT and JTMSK, are used for meteor scatter, and Whisper 2 is the beacon solution. So that's what you would choose. And you could see here that you can change between bands, and it tells you exactly what frequency your VFO should be tuned to for the Whisper pass band to be centered at 1500 hertz. And you can kind of see here. Can you guys see my cursor, by the way? You can't. The top box with the waterfall, you can see that there's a green line and a red line right at 1500 hertz. So that's the entire Whisper passband. You can see JT65 signals down between 0 and 500 hertz. all those tiny thin lines basically at 1500 hertz are all whisper signals. And you can see the last round here that just finished decoding, which would have been the one that's just about to go down uh, the waterfall and away from screen view. Uh, there were 4 different signals, and we're talking about that's 100 hertz in that passband, and you could fit 8, 10, 15 probably whisper signals. So the bandwidth is very small. Um, so you could see whisper signals coming in, um, and you can enable TX. Uh, you would always want to do upload your spots, and you can see here it says upload decoded messages to whispernet.org. As long as you have an internet connection, you would want to do that. You could see that I actually just went into transmit mode. So at the bottom of the screen here, you can see it says TX and my call sign. So I'm transmitting right now. Your TX in hertz, this part right here. Can you guys see what I'm highlighting? That part right there. Is that you, Mark? Okay, well, there's going to be a little bit of a delay. Yeah. So it says TX 1450 hertz. I mean, same concept for you to put your signal anywhere would be clicking up in the passband. And I'm actually going to abort this transmission to show you that. If you go back up towards the waterfall, you can see that I'm moving that little red dot around. That's basically just where you want to put your signal within the whisper passband. And every time I change it, you can see down here where it says TX and then 1547 hertz, that changes. That's 1437. So if there's a lot of activity at the top end, you can move yourself down a little bit so you can improve your chances of being decoded. Here's where I'm talking about, and I forgot actually 1.7 incorporated. A pretty neat way for you to be able to not have to do the calculation of watts to dBm. So right here it tells you would set your power level. If you're transmitting at 5 watts, you would select that, and when it broadcasts or it sends out a beacon, it's going to say your call sign, your grid square, and your dBm is 37. But like I said, I'm transmitting at a half a watt, so I'll go back to 27. Same concept applies for any digital mode. The power level over here, all the way TX audio level adjust. Don't think of that as like the power setting on your rig or something like that. All you're doing is adjusting your output volume that's being sent to the rig. And you'd want to set it up so you're not tripping your ALC or anything like that, causing splatter. I actually have a little piece of software here called FlexMeter up in the corner. So if I hit the tune button, you could see up here that it says, I'm right around 46 watts or so. If I adjust the so-called power setting here, through audio volume, I can adjust how much RF I'm essentially modulating. But the key thing there is to remember not to be putting so much audio into your rig that you're going to cause splatter or something like that. One really neat feature is band hopping, which you can see right here. When I click on it, I can enable band hopping, and you click a schedule. Your schedule pops up, and you can basically have this piece of software jump between as many bands as you want, depending on what time of day. And you can set it so some of them are receive only. Like for example, I don't have a transmit antenna for 160 meters, so on occasion I want to listen to it. So at nighttime when I have band hopping enabled, it'll go down and listen to 160 meters, but it won't transmit on it because I have it set for receive only. And that's pretty neat. That can really begin to give you an idea of where you're being heard and where you're hearing, because you can just have it hop all over the place. So at gray line in the morning, it'll go between 80 meters, 40 meters, 30 meters, 20. I think you guys kind of get the idea of what that's getting at. But pretty neat that you can just sit around and have it automatically band hop. It's an unattended mode, so you can set it up and and walk away, which I do frequently. I'll get ready for bed. I'll set Whisper up, go to sleep, and then wake up in the morning and see where I was heard and see what band conditions are like. Yeah. So that's, well, you mean in your own personal log? Well, that's right here where you could see upload spots. When you click upload spots, um, and you hold your mouse over it, it says upload decoded messages to whispernet.org. So when you're enabled for upload spots, it's going to take, here it says KE8WO, K4EH, AJ8S. It's going to take all that information that I decoded and automatically upload it to whispernet.org. Yeah. That's pretty much it. In a nutshell, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you guys have about it. Sure. Do you have a like a signal link or anything like that? Okay. Digital modes are a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. And you could do all kinds of stuff with it. I mean, um, you know, down in the PSK part of the band, there's like, you could just see it it switched bands on me. It took me down to because I enabled band hopping. I don't really want to do that. I'll go back to 30 meters here. There's a lot you can do when you interface your computer for digital modes. The PSK portion of the band, especially on 40 meters and 20 meters, seems to always have someone there. Some pretty fun modes, like Thor, Throb, Olivia, Contestia. Those are always kind of fun to work because they can decode at relatively weak signals, but you're essentially having a rag chew with a guy keyboard to keyboard. What's a Feldhell? A Hellschreiber is it's basically a fax type mode that you literally are decoding sound instead of bits and ones and zeros, either through FSK or through PSK through phase shift keying. It's think of it almost like a fax machine in a concept of how it works. There's so much stuff, and then the JT modes, JT65 and 9. I mean, it's hard for me to keep track with my logbook the way it's set up, but I'm pretty close to DXCC with 5 watts or less. Yeah, and that's almost all through JT65 and JT9. No, I'll even show you here. Let's go. We're on 30. We'll just go to, and I'm going to. I guess I can't do that. So all I did here was switch to JT9 and JT65. The differences between them. JT65 is about 100 hertz worth of bandwidth. JT9 is like 10 hertz or less. This isn't a great example because there's no JT9 activity. So I'm going to go down. Yeah, here we go. Here's a great example. So I went down to 40 meters. And we'll start seeing some stuff scroll across the screen. By the way, it's not a mode for everyone. There are many people out there that basically think watching paint dry is more interesting than dealing with the JT65Q. So because it takes 6 minutes to complete one exchange, but we'll kind of let it come across here. And so the wider signals are in the lower portion of the band or of the pass band, and the thinner signals are towards the top. That's JT9 at the top. You can see a blue line here at 2500 hertz in the waterfall at the top. That separates the JT65 from the JT9 subband. So everything below 2500 hertz is going to be JT65. Everything above that is going to be JT9. And you can see I have a pretty wide passband. Like with this radio, I can listen to 5 kilohertz worth of bandwidth at once, and that's not the case with every rig. So if you just if it's just a little bit too wide, if you can only listen to 2500 kilohertz worth of bandwidth on your rig, then you can just basically go back and forth between JT65 and JT9, and it'll move for you automatically. If I were to just click on JT9 here, you could see that my VFO went up by 2 kilohertz, and that'll move me into the JT9 subband. So when this next round starts to decode here, you'll see all those squiggly lines that were at the thin lines that were above 2500 hertz are going to be shifted down farther because I went up in frequency just a little bit. So JT65 is by far the most popular, and that's, I think, just because of a legacy type thing. There's plenty of, there's like JT65HF. There are other guys out there that have made JT65 software in addition to Joe Taylor's, and none of them have JT9. JT65 will decode. It has about 2 dB signal to noise ratio more sensitive than JT65, and of course it's significantly less bandwidth than JT65. So you can get out better, you can be heard in worse conditions, and you're using up less bandwidth. So that's kind of why I like JT9. One thing to keep in mind is JT9 doesn't do so well over the poles when there's polar flutter. JT65 is much more resilient. That's not too much of a concern for us unless here you're trying to work Asia or something like that. But if you're on the West Coast and you're trying to work Europe, you're going over the pole a lot. So JT65 might be a little bit more resilient than 9. I'll go back to monitoring everything here. Another thing to keep in mind, again, my rig's a little bit different, so my audio response throughout the entire passband is universal, but that's not the case with my 7100. So say I decode something up at 2900 hertz up here, and I want to reply to him. Well, just because my audio passband is being received well by the rig doesn't mean that the frequency response is going to be as good on transmit. It took me a while to realize the fact that, on my IC7100, I would click up here, I would reply to him, and then I would realize that, my radio is indicating there's no power output because I'm putting audio into it outside of the transmit bandwidth capabilities. And I'm just telling you guys this because you may run into this situation on your own. If you go into settings, you go into radio, and for split operation, if you click fake it, what that's going to do is every time you transmit, depending on where you have this set in the passband, it will shift your VFO. As long as you have cat control, it'll shift your VFO so that wherever you're transmitting will be right around 1500 hertz. Which is, that's like when the ARRL tests new radios and stuff like that. They do a frequency response or at 1500 hertz. It'll always put you right in the middle of the sweet spot for transmitting. I don't think I described that very well, but I hope you guys get. Yeah. So there's here we are at about 8:30 at night, and there's just tons of stuff out there. Here's there's Cuba. There is, who else is out there? Cuba. YY is what's that? Brazil? No, it's YY. Venezuela. Here's England. There's another whole minute's worth of transmissions. We're looking at maybe about 3,000 hertz worth of bandwidth, which would fit like one sideband voice signal. And in that bandwidth, there's like dozens of guys communicating at once. That's pretty much, here's Russia. It's it's a really neat mode. It's a really neat mode. Yeah, I would definitely encourage you to, give JT65 a shot once you get set up with digital. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? What's that? Why? Really? I'm almost positive YY's Venezuela. I could be wrong. Yep. And then HJHK, SJ's Colombia. And I for whatever reason, I always, because PP and PY and then VY and YY, I always invert them between Brazil and Venezuela for whatever reason. And there are always a lot of them on. No, George Bird did a presentation on JT65 about a year and a half ago for the club. Well, it was before I joined, Paul. Yeah. I'd be happy to do a presentation on JT65. We might. Yeah. I mean, look at all this stuff coming in. It's just tons of DX. I'll just double click on this guy. We'll try and work him. I'm gonna bump that up to, we'll do 5 watts. Oh, my tuner kicked in. I am working US7 India Sierra, which is got to be the Ukraine. Actually, it'll tell me right here. Yeah, Ukraine. And about 4 watts or so. And we'll see if it works. He's pretty light. You can see where I'm transmitting up in the waterfall, and you can see the last minute where he was coming in. And he's pretty light. There's some stronger signals out there. But I attribute JT65 to be no different than just setting up a folding chair and throwing a line in the water and waiting for sunnies to, it's the same thing. You're going fishing. Yeah, but it becomes a lot, because then it becomes fishing with a 12 gauge shotgun when you have a beam and 1500 watts. You're literally shooting fish in a barrel at that point. This is a lazy Sunday afternoon with no care in the world doing this kind of stuff. But I like keeping it up, especially when I'm in the shack and if I'm doing other work or something like that. It's easy to multitask JT65. Unlike if you were having a CW or sideband or keyboard to keyboard cue, so that kind of requires your attention the whole time. So let's see if he came back to me here. I kind of doubt it. I didn't put a whole lot of power into it. Nope, he CQ'd again. Try this guy. We're going to try to work a K4 here. And I'll bring that way down. I'll bring that down to 0.5 watt. So you figure if I work him, he's about, it says right here, 894 miles away from me in Echo Lima 98. That's like 1,600 miles per watt. Which is funny. I don't know if you guys have heard of the 1,000 mile per watt club. Yeah. JT65 like just makes it so easy to do that. I mean, like, literally, I could get on a band that's open at any point and work over 1,000 miles in under a watt. It's just kind of funny. So we'll see if this guy comes back to us. He's pretty strong on the waterfall. Can you see her? Am I not broadcasting the screenshot anymore? Oh, You can see me. It's a good thing I didn't like get naked or something like that. I thought for sure you could only see the screen. So I'm telling you, guys out there, I can totally understand why it's like watching paint dry, because it's been 2 minutes since that guy sent a CQ, and now I'm going to find out whether or not he's going to come back to me. Be up in a minute? Okay. Yeah. It's working DXCC on JT65 is difficult, because for every 20 guys in the Gambia that have a CW keyer or a microphone, maybe one will be operating on digital modes. He didn't come back to me. He's working a Cuban, but it's working fish in a barrel. I mean, it's not working fish in a barrel. It's slow fishing. I could turn the power up a little bit if I want. High power, by the way, like QRO is considered 20 watts on JT65. If you're doing 50 watts or something like that, that's just way too much power for this mode. So better luck hunting next time. But yeah, any other questions about this software? Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anyone out there that's got like a signal link that they're looking to sell. I can't think of anyone. Swap.qth, that's kind of my go-to for looking for used ham gear. I've always had good success with that website. Or you just, you go out there and buy one new or something like that. But what kind of rig do you have again, Mark? All right, yeah. Yeah, it is. All the Kenwoods are nice radios. All the Kenwoods are nice. Mm-hmm. All right, boys. Well, yeah, sure. Anyone have any questions, drop me a line anytime. But thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I am going to stop recording here in a minute and put it up on YouTube, and I'll put a link on the page. Yeah. Yep. 73. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.